王子、王がお呼びでしたよ。着替えてすぐ行ってください。
This is Domas. He's a sword master and one of the renowned Big Four of the Bosse Kingdom. Now, with a title like that, you'd think he'd be a great candidate to teach and train students, but you'd be sadly mistaken. It turns out he's a pretty lousy teacher, and by the end of episode 4, I wouldn't blame you for thinking he's one of the worst characters in the show, because that's exactly what I thought as well. But I took a step back and really analyzed what was going on. I wanted to know why I thought he was a bad person, and if my feelings were justified. The answer? Well, let's find out together, shall we? In the beginning, Domas seemed like a person we'd actually end up trusting. Not only was he able to communicate with Boji using sign language, but compared to Queen Healing, he seemed kind and gentle towards him. Through a flashback in episode 4, he was ecstatic to know that Boji was able to understand him. The problem came with his inability to teach. On one hand, it was a tremendous honor to be able to teach the prince, but it proved to be much more of a challenge than he anticipated. Domas, like many of the other characters in the show, was narrow-minded. He sees Boji's potential, but doesn't know how to unlock it. He didn't think about exploring other ways to train him because of two things. The first is because Boji was Bosse's child. It's natural to think that Boji had inherited his father's strength. Bosse was strong enough to reach the top of the rankings with his strength alone, but Boji showed no signs of that himself. Domas begins to question himself, which brings me to the second point, the way he learned his style of swordsmanship. His style emulates that of King Bosse. Again, because Boji was Bosse's child, Domas believed that he should be taught the same style of fighting. I think it's safe to assume that this is the definitive swordsmanship of a king, as shown during his brief spar with Daida, where he was thoroughly impressed with his style of fighting, because it was the most similar to King Bosse. With Boji, however, all Domas did was look confused and worried. As I mentioned in my last video, I felt that his worrying was justified. It's true that Boji was very skilled at dodging, but he wouldn't be able to defeat his enemies, something that was pointed out by Despa as well. Another thing to note were the spectators. Both Bebin and Domas realized that Boji's fighting style was gonna hurt his status as prince, and so Domas stepped in and said what he had to say. It was harsh, but he was looking out for him. He really did want Boji to become a king like his father. He just wasn't able to cope with his personal failure as a teacher. And so, when the time came to vote on who would take the throne, Domas had voted for Daida. Was this a scummy move? Absolutely. Domas betrayed his student, the prince no less, and essentially ran away from his duty to teach Boji swordsmanship. Daida even yells at him for being a coward. And this is where we really see where Domas' loyalty lies, because Daida orders him to kill Boji. It was a choice between his loyalty to the king or his promise to protect his student, and so he chose the king over his own moral compass. Earlier in the episode, he asks Hokuro if he was willing to follow any orders from his superiors, no matter what the circumstance, to which Domas answers yes. Episode 8 has the roles reversed, where Domas ran away from his responsibility to turn himself in order to preserve his own life. Hokuro, on the other hand, yells at Domas for being a coward. Sound familiar? Domas was forced to face his shortcomings, and he does turn a new leaf by the end of the show. So let's go back to the question of, was Domas a bad person? Yes and no. I feel like Domas was a victim of his circumstances, and the root of it all was because he wasn't fit to teach Boji, or probably anyone, if we're taking Hokuro's comment into account. If he was just introduced as a sword master and stayed that way, I don't think his character would have been nearly as bad. Domas was made out to be someone we could trust. He was supposed to be the one to support Boji, but he failed in the worst way possible. We see him take out his frustration because he was losing faith in his ability to teach. Failing Boji meant failing the king, but he had no idea what to do about it. It was clear that he favored Daida more, and so he did nothing but watch his student get beat up in a one-sided match. It took Apis to stop Daida from going too far, and he warns Domas for his inaction. The reason why he pushed Boji was because of Daida's orders, but I also think it was to get rid of that uneasiness he felt when he was teaching Boji. It wasn't as though he was devoid of remorse either. I'm sure it didn't sit well with him, hence why he asked Hokuro about his loyalty. He wanted to believe that he was doing the right thing. When he was given the orders to kill Boji, he was placed in a situation where he had to choose between his loyalty to Daida and his promise to Boji, two people he did not want to betray. He told himself that orders were absolute, because he believed that to be the right thing. Domas chose not to turn himself in because he didn't want to tell Healing that her son gave him the orders to kill his brother, even though that would be the right thing to do. However, a scandal like this would surely cause confusion within the kingdom. Once again, Domas was stuck between a rock and a hard place. And this isn't me trying to justify his actions, because no matter how you slice it, his actions were terrible. I don't think he was a bad person in the beginning. I really do believe that if he was anything but Boji's teacher, he wouldn't have pushed him. But because he was, he began to lose more and more faith in himself and in Boji, which is why he chose to follow Daida's orders. He believed him to be more fit for the role after all. This is where I'd like to talk about Despa. Despa is everything Domas should have been. Just like Domas, he tells Boji that he's fine the way he is, except this time, he actually meant it. Although Boji had no way to gain physical strength, he was compelled to make Boji stronger, unlike Domas, who seemed to have given up. Even without physical strength, he saw that Boji still had all sorts of potential. Despa was there every step of the way. When it came down to selecting a weapon, he'd already had something in mind, but he wanted to see if Boji could find it himself. He understands that training alone is necessary for him, but he also tells Kage to support him whenever he begins to lose heart. He's not only mindful of Boji, but those around him, because he knows the importance of having someone there to keep him steady. Unlike Domas, Despa wanted to establish where Boji's strengths were and build up from there, instead of trying to teach him something that's clearly out of his element. I hate to sound like a dead horse, but this is something that Domas did not even do. Not even after seeing it firsthand. Although strength is a necessary quality for a king, it comes in different forms. Boji's strength came in the form of mental fortitude. A king is someone who stands up against the strong to protect the weak. Confidence is key here because being able to exude it gives people hope. After all, if the king doesn't have faith in himself, how does he expect others to follow? And the results speak for themselves. If you recall, Boji was criticized because he wasn't able to subdue his opponents. He doesn't seem like the type of person to pummel his enemies into the ground either. Despa was able to teach him a way to knock out his opponents instead, which really highlighted his quick reflexes. All in all, Despa was able to do something Domas couldn't. Have faith in someone who had the whole world against him. And that's all I really have to say about Domas and Despa. I don't really have a good way of ending this video, to be honest, without regurgitating what I already said. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and a comment, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!